morning everyone. I am Nisreen and we are going to connect a phonetics session with Pranay. And so let's start with what do you mean by phonetics? Pranay, can you tell me what do you mean by phonetics?
Okay, now phonetics is just a scientific study of the speech sounds that emanate from a mouth.
Alright, what do we need for our speech sounds now? So for that we need to focus on the speech organs. So let's see the diagram we have here, which talks about the speech organs in our body. It's here we see the organs of speech, which starts from the nasal tract, the hard palate, the alveolar ridge, lips, teeth, tongue ridge, the velic port on the other side, velum, soft, which is also known as soft palate, tongue, pharynx, glottis, vocal cords and vocal folds. So these are the organs of speech which we have in our mouth, and they are the interior organs. Alright, now there are three systems in our body. The three main systems in our body are known as the respiratory system, the phonatory system and the articulatory system. Pranay, can you tell me what do you mean by the respiratory system?
Sure. The respiratory system, the flow of air from the lungs is controlled by the respiratory system. It helps in the flow of air. The muscles of the chest, they compress and they expand, and that directs the flow of air. And the windpipe, it helps us control the flow of air. So the lungs, the muscles of the chest and the windpipe, they comprise the respiratory system.
Then we have the phonatory system, which comprises of the larynx and the vocal cords. Further, the articulatory system, which comprises of the pharynx, the lips, the teeth ridge, the hard palate, the soft palate. As we saw, it is also known as the velum, the soft palate, the uvula and the tongue. These are the three main systems in our body which function to produce speech sounds. Now, we already know what phonetics is. Let's deal with phonology, from where the word comes. Phonetics, it is a scientific study of speech sounds, whereas phonology, it is a scientific study of speech sounds for a given language, for a particular language, not for all languages as such. Then, in the study of phonetics, we have phonemes. What do you mean by phonemes, Pranay?
Phonemes, the definition is they are the smallest distinctive sound unit. For example, cake and bake. The A and the E sound is what distincts both the words. So that's called the smallest distinctive sound unit.
Now, Pranay gave us an example of cake and bake, which means the b sound in bake is there with the k sound. Now, when only two sounds can be used in place of each other, but the meaning of the word changes. So, cake is one example and bake is another example. The ache, the end part, the last part of the word remains the same, only the first sound changes. So, from b it becomes k and k as b. That is a phoneme. Further, we have an allophone. What is an allophone? An allophone is smaller than a phoneme, but it deals with complementary distribution in a word. Now, allophones have allophonic variations. Pranay, can you give me an example of an allophone?
Okay, as we talked about the phonemes, it deals with a sound in two different words. But when you talk about an allophone, it will deal with one sound in two different words. For example, cake and scale. Cake, the k sound in cake, that is, it comes in the beginning, so it's aspirated. It's not called k, it's called k. So we pronounce it as cake. And when we talk about the pronunciation of the sound k in scale, the k sound comes medially. So that is different than when it comes initially. So we can talk about the same sound but in two different words. So that is known as allophonic variations.
Thank you, Pranay. Now further on, we move with the sounds in English. We majorly have two main sounds in English known as the vowel sounds and the consonant sounds. Now, what do you mean by consonant sounds and vowel sounds? First of all, we would just give you a definition for consonant sounds. Pranay, can you just read the definition given here?
Okay, the definition for a consonant sounds. The sounds which are produced with an obstruction and a certain degree of narrowing in the mouth and the pharynx, causing audible friction, are known as consonant sounds. Now, what we deal here with the consonant sounds is that it has got passive and active articulators in the mouth, which when they come in contact with each other, they produce different sounds.
Which means in consonant sounds, there is an obstruction. While when we talk about vowel sounds, they are completely opposite of consonant sounds. There is no obstruction in the vowel sounds or narrowing of any degree at all. So whatever the definition Pranay gave for consonant sounds, the vowel sounds is completely opposite to that. Now this is the definition, and further on there are 3 ways of recognizing a consonant sound in a word. The 3 main ways is, first of all, you need to know whether the sound is a voiced sound or a voiceless sound. How do you know that? For that, you need to focus on the vocal cords. The vocal cords are in your throat. How do you know the vibration and if they do not vibrate, it's a voiceless. So Pranay, in detail, just put light on how do you know whether a sound is a voiceless sound or a voiced sound.
Okay, whether a sound is voiced or voiceless depends on the vocal cords. When the vocal cords vibrate, it's called a voice sound, and when the vocal cords do not vibrate, it's called a voiceless sounds. You can get to know this by putting your fingers here on the throat, and I'll just give you an example of a voice sound. The voice sound is z. When you put your fingers here and you pronounce the word z, there's a vibration here that you'll feel. It's just a slight hum, but you'll have to feel it. Okay, and when you give an example of a voiceless sound, you can just for an example, sir, the sound sir. When you put your fingers here and you pronounce the sound sir, there'll be no vibration. So the sound sir is called a voiceless sound, and z is called a voice sound.
To know more about it, you make the hissing sound with sir, which is like s, and you make a buzzing sound with z, which is z. So when you say s, you feel that there is not much vibration, and that is why sir is a voiceless sound. But z, when you do the buzzing sound, which is z, that is when there is a little bit of vibration there, from which you know that z is a voiced sound. Further, the second way to know if there is a consonant sound in a word or not is the place of articulation. Now, the definition of the place of articulation is the interaction of the passive articulators with the active articulators tells us the place from where and how the sound can be produced. Pranay has already talked about the active articulators and the passive articulators. Now, when they both meet, when there is an interaction between the active articulators and the passive articulators, that is when you know which place is the sound from where the sound is produced, and that is known as place of articulation. Now, the third thing is the manner of articulation. The manner of articulation tells us how the sound is produced. Pranay, tell me more about the manner of articulation.
Okay. The manner of articulation is decided by the place of articulation itself. When we talk about the active and the passive articulators, for example, the tongue and the teeth ridge, then we get the place of articulation, which is called the alveolar sound. But then the manner of articulation is in which manner does the tongue raise and reach the teeth ridge, and that is called the manner of articulation. There are different types of manners which we'll deal with later on.
So those are the consonant sounds and the different ways of how a consonant sound is produced. Just in brief, let's know how a consonant sound is produced. First of all, you need to know whether the sound is a voiced sound or a voiceless sound, and that is known through the vocal cords. Then you deal with the place of articulation, from where the sound is produced, and then is the manner of articulation, how the sound is produced. Let's talk more about the place of articulation. For the manner of articulation, an extensive study needs to be done, but there are basically 9 places of articulation which we will explain in detail and tell you how you know that particular sound is bilabial or labiodental, etc. So let's deal with the bilabial sounds first. Bilabial sounds are those sounds where 2 lips interact with each other for the production of bilabial sounds. The example of bilabial sounds are p, b, m. Now m is a nasal sound as well. That's the manner of articulation. So m, instead of saying m, we'll say as it is a nasal sound. And the last sound is w. These are the 4 examples of bilabial sounds, which is the place of articulation. Pranay, just briefly give me the words, examples like starting with p, b, m, and w.
Okay. Any words that start the initial sound should be p, b, m, or w. For example, pot, ball, mall, or world. That's the difference between v and w. We'll talk about v in a short time. That is a dental sound. So here we're talking about w. So for example, world. Whenever the 2 lips, the upper lip and the lower lip meet, that's called a bilabial sound. Bi means 2 and labial means lips. So that's a literal translation of the meaning.
So as Pranay talked about w and v, w is a bilabial sound because that's when the interaction is done with 2 lips, whereas v is a labiodental sound because there you have the production with the lower lip and the upper teeth. So the second the second place of articulation is known as labiodental, where we deal with the V sound. So you know the difference between W and V, which is V and V. So labiodental sounds are those where the interaction is between the lower lip and the upper teeth. Those are the two articulators, and the two sounds falling in the labiodental category is F and B. The examples for words I would give: F as in fan, V as in van. V is the V sound here. Further, we have dental sounds. Now, what are dental sounds? Dental has the articulators as the tip of the tongue and the upper teeth. So, th and the are dental sounds. It's not the way we pronounce th in Gujarati, but it is th and the as it is in English. Pranay, give me a definition with both the sounds, th and the.
Okay, when we say th, the tongue, that the tip of the tongue should come and connect with the teeth, the upper teeth. So it will not pronounce it as thank you, but it will be thank you. It's not th, it's th. And when we talk about the, we are used to saying it the because of the influence of the mother tongue, but it's not the. We have to put our tongue in between the teeth. That is, it will pronounce like the.
So second example, like instead of, let's not deal with the all the time. So the can be this. You know, the sound the can also be used in the word this, and that is a dental sound. Further, we have alveolar sounds. Now, what are alveolar sounds? The active articulator is the blade and the tip of the tongue, and the passive articulator is the teeth ridge. So Pranay has already talked about the active and the passive articulators. In alveolar sounds, the active articulator is the blade and the tip of the tongue, whereas the passive articulator is the teeth ridge. The examples of the alveolar sounds are t, d. N is again a nasal sound, so as it was in m, you don't say m, you say m. Similarly, n will not be n, it will be n. L, s, and z. Pranay, examples for all. You're going to be my example man.
Okay. When alveolar sound, what we need to understand when we talk about active and passive articulators is that all the parts in the lower jaw, all of them are the active articulators because only the lower jaw can move, and we include the tongue in the active articulators. Now, talking about the examples of the alveolar sound, the active articulator is the blade of the tongue and the tip of the tongue, and the passive articulator is the teeth ridge. The teeth ridge is a part which is just above your upper teeth. You can feel it by putting your tongue there. And we talked about the words that are t, d, n, l, s, and z. We'll give an example for each. For t, you can say tired. D, it will be a duck. N is no. L is lit. S will be
Slow.
Will be slow. Yeah, thank you. And Z will be like a zoo.
All
Okay.
right. So those all are the alveolar sounds. It doesn't really matter that you have to begin with these sounds. In the whole word, if t, d, n, l, s, z come, those are the sounds still known as the alveolar sounds. We're just giving examples with words starting with that particular sound. The next sound, the next place of articulation is post-alveolar sound. Now, in the post-alveolar sound, you have the tip of the tongue and the rear part of the teeth ridge, which produce a post-alveolar sound. Pranay has already explained what a teeth ridge is. I think a teeth ridge is real hard as well. So, when you put your tongue up above, you know that is the teeth ridge. In English, there are not many post-alveolar sounds. In fact, I will say it is only r, only one sound, which is known as a post-alveolar sound. Pranay, give me a word from r.
Okay, R is really complicated because R is pronounced differently in British English as well as American English. We'll talk about the retroflex sound that occurs only in the American English. That is the R which is rolled. Okay, and the British accent, the R, we can say any word like a river or ran or a ring. Any example can be used, but then we don't need to roll the R sound in British, that is standard English. The R sound is rolled only in American English, and that is the next sound that is called a retroflex sounds, and Nisreen will talk about that.
So when you, for example, both our names have r. Nisreen also has r, Pranay's name also has r. So if I say my name in American English, it'll be Nisreen, and that is a retroflex sound. And if we say Pranay's name in American English, it'll be Pranay. The way we say here we say is Pranay, Nisreen. But in American English, it's Nisreen and Pranay, where the R is rolled, and that is when we get a retroflex sound. Now, what is a retroflex sound? The definition of a retroflex sound is where the underside of the tip of the tongue and the front of the hard palate are the articulators which produce a retroflex sound. Now, the R in British English is not a retroflex sound. That is a post-alveolar sound, which we've already talked about. But the R in American English is the retroflex sound, as I gave the examples of our names that tells you about the retroflex sound. The next sound is the palato-alveolar sound. This sound is produced by two simultaneous sounds together. The first one is when your blade of the tongue and the teeth ridge interact. And the second one is where the front of the tongue and the hard palate interact. These two ways produce a palato-alveolar sound. And the examples of these sounds are ch, y, sh and j. Y is represented by the alphabet J, but that doesn't mean that it is pronounced as j. The pronunciation is y. So the four palato-alveolar sounds are ch, y, sh and j. Pranay, examples for all the four sounds.
Okay, the sounds that we talked about in the palato-alveolar section are ch, y, sh and j. Now there's a difference in the word y. It's written as the English word J, but we'll talk about that. It's called a semi-vowel, and we'll talk about the vowel sound later on. So I'll just give an example of each word. Ch is you can say in chair. Y is when you say yes. Sh is when you talk about a shirt, and j is the last sound in a garage. You don't say it's a garage. It's not a j sound. It's a j sound. You can say it's a garage.
And I think even treasure also has the sound j. So treasure is also a word. Like in the end, when you say j, that is a j sound, which is treasure. Further, we have the palatal sound. Now, what is a palatal sound? The front of the tongue articulates with the hard palate for a palatal sound. This is the definition of a palatal sound. Y is a palatal sound. It's written as J, but this is just simple for you to understand that the letter Y in English, we usually, when used in words, we say it as Y, and that is why it's written Y here.